Paige Dawson held the cream-colored invitation between trembling fingers, reading the embossed text for the 100th time that week. 10 years. A decade since she'd walked across that graduation stage, diploma in hand, future supposedly bright ahead. The Paramount Hotel ballroom, downtown Seattle, cocktail attire requested. The reunion committee had done their research, tracking down every member of Lincoln High's class of 2015, sending invitations to scattered addresses across the country. She'd almost thrown it away the day it arrived. Her Portland apartment was small but comfortable, filled with case files from the county social services department and empty takeout containers she kept forgetting to throw away. The invitation had sat on her kitchen counter for 3 weeks, gathering coffee stains and judgment. Lennox had found it during one of her impromptu visits, waving it like evidence of a crime. "You have to go." Her best friend's voice still echoed in her memory. "You've been avoiding this for years." Paige had protested, listing reasons why attending would be torture. She didn't keep in touch with anyone from high school. She had work commitments. The drive from Portland to Seattle was exhausting. But Lennox had seen through every excuse, her dark eyes knowing and relentless. "This is about him, isn't it? About Isaiah." The name had hung in the air between them like smoke. Yes, it was about Isaiah Crawford, though Paige hadn't admitted it out loud until that moment. Everything circled back to Isaiah eventually, no matter how many years passed or how many miles she put between herself and Seattle. Now she stood in her bedroom, the green dress she'd finally chosen after trying on 14 others hanging from the closet door. The color brought out her eyes, or so the sales clerk had insisted. Paige wasn't sure she cared about bringing out her eyes. She cared about looking different from the girl Isaiah had known. Better, stronger, like someone who had their life together, even if the reality involved too much wine on weeknights and a string of failed relationships that never progressed past 3 months. Her phone buzzed, Lennox checking in for the 5th time that afternoon. "You left yet?" Not helping Paige type back. "You're going to be late if you don't leave now," still deciding. "Paige Elizabeth Dawson, get in your car, drive to Seattle, face your past, stop being a coward." The word coward stung because it was accurate. Paige had been a coward at 18, choosing her parents' approval over the boy she loved. She'd been a coward for the past decade, avoiding Seattle whenever possible, taking jobs in other cities, building a life that carefully excluded any chance of running into Isaiah Crawford. She checked the RSVP list one final time on the reunion website. The committee had posted names of confirmed attendees, updating it weekly. Isaiah Crawford's name had appeared there 2 months ago, and Paige had stared at her laptop screen for 20 minutes straight, heart hammering against her ribs. He might not actually show up, she told herself. People RSVP and then cancel all the time. But she knew Isaiah. He'd been class vice president, captain of the debate team, beloved by teachers and students alike. If he said he'd attend, he would attend. That was the kind of person Isaiah was. Reliable, honest, everything Paige had thrown away because she'd been too afraid to stand up to her parents. The memory surfaced unbidden, sharp enough to draw blood after all these years. Her mother Candace's face when she'd discovered them together, lips swollen from kissing, clothes disheveled. The screaming that followed. Her father Robert's cold fury, worse than any shouting. The ultimatum delivered over dinner 2 nights later, her mother's barely touched chicken parmesan going cold on china plates. "This stops now." Robert's voice had been quiet, deadly. "You end this relationship with that boy, or you're no longer our daughter." Paige had been 18 and paralyzed with fear. Her college fund, her car, her place in the family, all of it contingent on breaking Isaiah's heart. She'd chosen safety. She'd chosen wrong. The drive from Portland to Seattle took 3 hours on a good day. Saturday evening traffic would be lighter at least. Paige grabbed her purse and the invitation, taking one last look in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked polished, professional, like she had her life figured out. The woman in the mirror was a liar. Her car, a sensible Honda that got good gas mileage and had never given her problems, felt like a prison as she pulled onto I-5 North. She'd made this drive countless times over the years, visiting Lennox after she'd moved to Seattle for work, attending conferences, carefully timing trips to avoid any chance of an unexpected encounter. Seattle was a big city, she'd told herself. The odds of randomly running into one specific person were astronomical. Except tonight, those odds were 100%. The highway stretched ahead, gray and monotonous. Paige turned on the radio, searching for something that wouldn't remind her of high school or Isaiah or the promises they'd made as children. Everything reminded her anyway. The classic rock station played songs they'd sung together on late-night drives. The top 40 stations cycled through artists they'd discovered during study sessions in his bedroom, his mother bringing up snacks and pretending not to notice how close they sat together. She switched to a podcast about true crime, letting someone else's tragedy distract her from her own poor life choices. The Seattle skyline appeared as the sun began its slow descent toward the Puget Sound. Paige had always loved this view, the Space Needle, rising above the city like a promise of something bigger than small-town thinking and narrow minds. Her parents had moved here when she was 7, Robert taking a position at a prestigious accounting firm, Candace joining the junior league, and immediately beginning her climb up Seattle's social ladder. Paige had hated it at first. She'd been a California girl used to sunshine and the specific social ecosystem of her elementary school. Seattle was gray and wet, and she didn't know anyone. Her parents had bought a house in a neighborhood known for good schools and even better property values, where every lawn was manicured and every family had the right connections. She'd been sitting alone at the neighborhood park, missing her old friends and her old life when a boy had approached her. His skin was dark against the white t-shirt he wore, his smile bright and unself-conscious. He'd been holding a basketball, juggling it from hand to hand. "Hi, I'm Isaiah. Want to play?" That memory belonged to someone else, some other version of Paige, who didn't yet understand that the world would punish her for loving the wrong person. 7-year-old Paige had just seen a potential friend, someone who might make this new city feel less lonely. She'd said yes, and everything that followed had been inevitable. The Paramount Hotel rose from downtown Seattle like a monument to elegance and money. Paige pulled into the parking garage, finding a spot on the 4th level. Her hands shook as she applied lipstick in the rearview mirror, checking her reflection one final time. The green dress clung in all the right places. Her blonde hair fell in waves that had taken 45 minutes and 3 YouTube tutorials to achieve. She looked good. She looked nothing like the 18-year-old girl who'd broken her own heart to please her parents. The elevator ride down felt like descending into the underworld. Paige's stomach churned. She'd skipped lunch too nervous to eat, and now regretted it. The lobby was all marble and gold accents, the kind of place that made you feel underdressed no matter what you wore. Signs directed reunion attendees toward the ballroom on the 2nd floor. She could still leave. Turn around, get back in her car, drive to Portland, and pretend this hadn't happened. But Lennox would never forgive her, and more importantly, Paige would never forgive herself. She'd spent 10 years running from this moment. Running solved nothing. The ballroom doors stood open, music and laughter spilling into the hallway. Paige smoothed her dress one final time and walked inside. The space was larger than she remembered from the planning committee's website photos. Round tables draped in white linens filled the room, each decorated with centerpieces featuring their school colors. A bar occupied one corner, already 3 people deep, with former classmates eager to take the edge off forced small talk. A DJ was set up near a dance floor where nobody had worked up the courage to dance yet. The walls displayed blown-up photos from their yearbook faces, frozen at 18, still believing the world would give them whatever they wanted. Paige recognized people immediately, even though 10 years had changed them. Meadow Sullivan stood near the registration table, showing photos on her phone to anyone who would look. She'd been head cheerleader, impossibly popular, the kind of girl who made high school look easy. Now she wore a designer dress that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion in her eyes as she talked about her 3 kids under 5. Bennett Roth worked the room like he was still running for class president. Real estate had been good to him, apparently. His suit probably cost more than Paige's monthly rent. He shook hands and clapped shoulders, his smile wide and practiced. Paige signed in at the registration table, accepting the name tag and drink tickets from a woman she vaguely recognized. The name tag felt like a brand. Paige Dawson, social worker, Portland, OR. Her entire identity reduced to 3 lines of text. She headed for the bar, needing something to do with her hands. The bartender was efficient and sympathetic, probably recognizing the desperate look of someone who really didn't want to be there. Paige ordered a gin and tonic, something sophisticated that would make her look like she had her life together. The first sip burned going down. She'd never developed a taste for gin, but wine felt too casual and beer too pedestrian. She was overthinking the alcohol. This was a bad sign. "Paige, oh my God, is that you?" She turned to find Rebecca Martinez, former drama club president, and her lab partner in AP chemistry. Rebecca looked almost exactly the same, just with better highlights and more expensive jewelry. Rebecca, hi. How are you? They fell into the familiar rhythm of reunion small talk. What are you doing now? Where are you living? Oh, are you married? Any kids? Paige delivered her practiced answers, asking the same questions in return. Rebecca was a pharmaceutical rep, married to her college boyfriend, two kids with a third on the way. She seemed happy in the genuine way some people achieved, where their life matched their expectations. You look amazing. Rebecca's smile was warm. I always wondered what happened to you after graduation. You just kind of disappeared. Paige deflected, mentioning her social work program in Portland, the job that kept her busy. She didn't mention that she'd chosen Portland specifically because it wasn't Seattle, because the distance felt necessary for survival. Have you seen anyone else from our group? Rebecca gestured toward the crowd. I ran into Marcus earlier. He's doing something with tech in San Francisco. And oh, Isaiah Crawford is here. Did you two keep in touch? You guys were so close in high school. The gin and tonic suddenly felt heavy in Paige's hand. She forced her expression to remain neutral, pleasant, betraying nothing of the panic spreading through her chest. No, we lost touch after graduation. You know how it is. Rebecca nodded, already distracted by someone else she'd spotted. She excused herself with promises to catch up more later, leaving Paige alone again, with her drink and her racing heart. Isaiah Crawford is here. She'd known he would be. Seeing his name on the RSVP list had been the final push that got her in the car. But knowing and confronting were different things. Knowing was abstract, safe. Confronting meant seeing him in person, seeing what the past decade had done to him, finding out if he'd forgiven her or if he still carried the hurt she'd inflicted. Paige drained the rest of her gin and tonic too quickly, the alcohol hitting her empty stomach like a punch. She needed to eat something, but the thought of food made her nauseous. She needed to leave, but her feet wouldn't move. She needed to see Isaiah, but the terror of it pinned her in place. The crowd shifted, and suddenly she saw him. 10 years had transformed Isaiah Crawford from a boy into a man. He stood near the bar, laughing at something someone had said, his head thrown back in genuine amusement. He'd always had a great laugh, the kind that made other people smile just hearing it. He'd filled out since high school, his shoulders broader, his presence more commanding. The gangly teenager was gone, replaced by someone who looked comfortable in his skin, confident in a way that came from hard-won self-knowledge. He wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly, clearly tailored. His hair was cut close, emphasizing the strong lines of his face. But his eyes were the same, warm brown and intelligent, the kind of eyes that saw through pretense and called you on your bullshit while somehow making you feel loved anyway. Paige's heart stopped. Then it restarted beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. She should look away. She should retreat to the bathroom or the parking lot or Portland, anywhere but here, standing in the middle of the ballroom, staring at the man she'd loved since she was 7 years old. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch him exist in a space she occupied closer than they'd been in a decade. Isaiah turned his head, scanning the room with casual interest. His gaze swept past her, then snapped back. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by surprise, followed by something more complicated that Paige couldn't read. Confusion, pleasure, pain. Maybe all three at once, emotions competing for dominance. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and Paige felt the impact like a physical thing. 10 years collapsed into nothing. She was 18 again, standing in her parents' living room, watching Isaiah's face crumble as she told him they couldn't be together anymore. She was 12, sitting in a treehouse, making promises she believed with her whole heart she'd keep. She was 7, being pushed on a swing by a boy who promised not to let her fall. Isaiah excused himself from his group. Paige watched him cross the ballroom with deliberate steps, each one bringing him closer, each one giving her time to panic. She set her empty glass on a nearby table, gripping the edge to steady herself. Her palms were sweating. Her mouth felt like cotton. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, new since high school. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woodsy and expensive, that definitely hadn't been in his budget when they were teenagers. Close enough to touch if either of them were brave enough to close that distance. Paige Dawson. His voice was deeper than she remembered, but unmistakably Isaiah. I wondered if you'd come. The words unlocked something in her throat. She managed to speak, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Isaiah, hi. You look, you look great. His eyes swept over her, taking in the green dress, the carefully styled hair, the professional makeup she'd applied, with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. The assessment lasted only seconds but felt eternal. So do you. The conversation was excruciating in its politeness, two strangers exchanging pleasantries, carefully avoiding any reference to the history that weighted every word. They'd loved each other. They'd hurt each other. They'd spent 10 years apart, and now they were discussing the weather and job titles like none of that mattered. What are you doing these days? Paige heard herself ask, as if she hadn't spent countless nights over the past decade searching his name online, piecing together his life from LinkedIn updates and carefully curated Instagram posts he'd eventually made private. Software engineer. Isaiah's tone was casual, giving away nothing. I actually moved back to Seattle last year, working at a tech startup downtown. The revelation hit her hard. He was in Seattle, not just visiting for the reunion, but living here, working here, building a life in the city they had both left behind. Paige had chosen Portland specifically to avoid Seattle, to avoid the risk of running into him, and he'd come back anyway. That's great. Congratulations. Portland's been good. Social work keeps me busy. Each sentence felt like pulling teeth. They were drowning in unspoken history, years of silence and regret, and questions that neither of them seemed brave enough to ask. Isaiah shifted his weight, glancing back toward his group of friends, and Paige realized with sudden desperation that this couldn't be it. She couldn't let him walk away with nothing but small talk and surface-level updates. Can we? Paige gestured toward a quieter corner away from the crowd. Can we talk? Actually talk, Isaiah hesitated. The pause lasted only a moment, but felt infinite. Paige watched emotions flicker across his face, the internal debate playing out in real time. Then he glanced toward a woman standing near the bar. Someone Paige hadn't noticed before. She was striking, beautiful in an effortless way that made Paige's carefully chosen dress and painstakingly styled hair feel like trying too hard. The woman was watching them with interest, her expression curious but not concerned. Yeah. Isaiah turned back to Paige. Let's talk. They found an alcove near the bathrooms, away from the noise, and the crowd and the relentless cheerfulness of reunion music. The space was small, intimate, in a way that felt dangerous. Up close, Paige could see all the ways time had marked Isaiah. Laugh lines bracketed his mouth, suggesting he smiled often. The scar above his eyebrow looked old, well-healed. There was a weariness in his expression that spoke of experiences she knew nothing about, 10 years of life she'd missed because she'd been too scared to fight for them. 10 years. The words came out before Paige could stop them. It's been 10 years since we last spoke. Isaiah nodded, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Since graduation. Since you... He stopped, seeming to reconsider his approach. Then he decided on directness, his voice level, but edged with something sharp. Since you told me we couldn't be together anymore because your parents disapproved. The words hung between them like an accusation, which is exactly what they were. Paige felt shame wash over her, fresh and painful as it had been a decade ago. Her throat constricted. She'd known this conversation would hurt, but the reality of it was worse than any anticipation. I was 18 and scared. The excuse sounded pathetic even to her own ears. My parents threatened to cut me off completely, to disown me if I kept seeing you. I didn't know what to do. You could have chosen me. Isaiah's tone stayed even, but Paige heard the old hurt underneath. Chosen us. But you didn't, I know. Paige's voice cracked, and I've regretted it every single day since. Isaiah looked at her sharply, his expression skeptical. Have you? Because you seem to have done fine. Social worker in Portland. Probably married with the white picket fence your parents always wanted for you. The assumption stung because it revealed what Isaiah had believed about her all these years. That she'd moved on, built the life her parents wanted, and forgotten all about him. That his heartbreak had been a minor inconvenience in her journey toward conventionality and approval. I'm not married, Paige forced the words out past the lump in her throat. Never even got close. And my relationship with my parents is complicated. I haven't spoken to my father in 3 years. Something shifted in Isaiah's expression. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of confusion, his narrative about her life starting to crack. What happened? I finally grew a spine. Paige tried for levity, but failed, her voice too bitter. Realized that anyone who tried to control who I love doesn't deserve a place in my life. Too late for us, but at least I learned the lesson. Isaiah was quiet, processing this information. The noise from the ballroom seemed distant, muffled. They existed in their own bubble of complicated history and unfinished business. Why tell me this now? Isaiah's tone was careful, guarded. After 10 years, Paige took a deep breath, committing to the vulnerability she'd driven 3 hours to risk. Because when we were kids, 12 years old, sitting in your treehouse after your mom made us those chocolate chip cookies, you promised me something, and I promised you back. Do you remember? Isaiah's expression shifted, memories flooding back with visible force. His shoulders dropped slightly, his defensive posture softening. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, tinged with something that sounded like reluctant nostalgia. I remember. The confirmation unlocked something in Paige's chest. He remembered. Of course he remembered. The promises made in that treehouse hadn't just been childish games to him either. You said, Paige Dawson, when we grow up, I'm going to marry you. We'll have a house with a big yard and 3 dogs and we'll be happy forever. Isaiah's lips quirked into something that wasn't quite a smile. And you said, I promise I'll marry you, Isaiah Crawford. Even if the whole world says we shouldn't, even if everyone tries to stop us, I'll choose you. The memory hung between them, precious and painful. Paige felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until she'd said what she came here to say. We were 12. Isaiah's voice was careful, gentle, even like he was trying to soften the blow of what he was about to say. Kids making promises they didn't understand. But we loved each other. Paige pressed forward, needing him to acknowledge it. Even then, we loved each other. And when we were 16, 17, that was real too. What we had was real. The gentleness left Isaiah's expression, replaced by something harder, more honest. It was real until you let your parents' racism destroy it. The word racism sat between them, ugly and accurate. Paige's parents had dressed their prejudice in concern and social expectations, but Isaiah was right. Their opposition to the relationship had been rooted in racism, pure and simple. Robert and Candace Dawson didn't believe their white daughter should date a black boy, and they'd wielded every weapon in their parental arsenal to end it. Do you know what that did to me? Isaiah's voice was hard now, the wound still raw despite a decade of distance. Having the girl I loved, the girl I'd loved since we were kids, tell me that her parents' opinion mattered more than what we had. I was wrong. The words felt inadequate, too small for the magnitude of the hurt she'd caused. You told me you loved me. You let me believe we'd figure it out, that we'd find a way. And then one day you just ended it. Said your parents would never accept you dating a black guy, that it was too hard, that maybe we should just be realistic about our differences. Paige was crying now, not caring who saw or what it did to her carefully applied makeup. The tears came hot and fast, 10 years of regret spilling down her cheeks. I know, I was a coward. I let them make me believe that love wasn't enough, that their social circle and their approval mattered more than my own happiness. And Isaiah, I was wrong, so completely, devastatingly wrong. Isaiah stared at her, his own eyes suspiciously bright. So why are you here? Why bring up promises we made as kids? This was it. The moment Paige had driven 3 hours to reach the question she'd been asking herself for a decade. She met his eyes, her voice steady despite the tears. Because I never stopped loving you. Because for 10 years I've measured every man against you and found them all wanting. Because I need to know. She paused, terrified of his answer, but unable to stop now. Does that childhood promise still matter? Is there any chance, any possibility that we could try again? Isaiah stared at her, emotions warring visibly across his face. Paige watched, hope and hurt and confusion and something that might have been longing, battle for dominance. His mouth opened, then closed. Whatever he was about to say died unspoken as footsteps approached their alcove. Isaiah, there you are. The woman from the bar appeared, sliding her arm through Isaiah's with comfortable possession. She was even more beautiful up close, her dark skin flawless, her natural hair styled in elegant twists. She wore a wine-colored dress that complemented her figure perfectly, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Her smile was warm as she looked between Isaiah and Paige, polite curiosity in her expression. I've been looking for you. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Isaiah's expression had shuddered the moment she touched his arm, becoming unreadable. Paige, this is Simone Banks, my girlfriend, Simone Paige Dawson. We went to high school together. The word girlfriend hit Paige like a fist to the sternum. She'd known it was possible, probable even. 10 years was a long time, and Isaiah was intelligent and kind and devastatingly attractive. Of course he had a girlfriend. Of course he'd moved on with someone who hadn't broken his heart and chosen her racist parents over him. But knowing it was possible and having it confirmed were different things. Paige felt the air leave her lungs, the room tilting slightly as reality reasserted itself. She'd come here hoping for something that no longer existed, mourning a relationship that Isaiah had clearly replaced. Nice to meet you, Paige forced the words out, her voice barely above a whisper. You too. Simone's smile was genuine, guileless. She had no idea about the history between the two people standing before her, no concept of the emotional devastation she'd just delivered simply by existing. Isaiah's told me so much about his high school friends. You guys had a great class from what I hear. Babe, they're about to do the awards ceremony. Best dressed, most likely to succeed, all that silly stuff. I'll be right there. Isaiah gently disentangled his arm from Simone's touch. Give me 1 minute, Simone nodded, squeezing his hand before heading back toward the ballroom. Paige watched her go, watched the easy grace of someone who belonged in Isaiah's life, who hadn't spent a decade regretting her choices. When Simone was out of earshot, Isaiah turned back to Paige. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned. No. Paige shook her head, trying to pull together some semblance of dignity. It's fine. It's been 10 years. Of course you moved on. I'm happy for you, Isaiah. Really? The lie tasted bitter, but she forced a smile that probably looked as broken as she felt. Paige, you should go. Paige cut him off before he could say whatever he was about to say. Simone's waiting. It was good seeing you. Take care of yourself. She walked away before he could respond, before she completely broke down in front of him and his girlfriend and everyone from their high school class. Her legs felt wooden, disconnected from her body. She made it through the ballroom, past the registration table, out into the hallway. The elevator took an eternity to arrive. Paige jabbed the button repeatedly, desperate to escape, before her composure cracked entirely. The parking garage was gray and cold and blessedly empty. Paige found her Honda on autopilot, fumbling with her keys, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice before managing to unlock the door. She got inside, pulled the door shut, and for 30 seconds she just sat there breathing. Then the tears came for real. Deep, wrenching sobs tore through her chest, the kind of crying that felt like it was tearing her apart from the inside. Paige gripped the steering wheel, her forehead pressed against it, her whole body shaking. She'd driven 3 hours to find out if that childhood promise still mattered, if there was any chance of reclaiming what they'd lost. The answer was no. Isaiah had a girlfriend. He'd moved on, built a new life that didn't include Paige Dawson. The promise they'd made in a treehouse at 12 years old didn't matter anymore, if it had ever mattered at all. Paige cried until her throat was raw and her eyes swollen. She cried for the girl she'd been too scared to fight for love. She cried for the years she'd wasted, the chances she'd missed, the cowardice that had defined her at 18. She cried for Isaiah, who'd been hurt by her choice and had apparently found someone new to build promises with. When the tears finally subsided, leaving her hollow and exhausted, Paige started her car. The engine turned over smoothly, reliable, even when everything else in her life felt like it was falling apart. She pulled out of the parking spot, navigating the garage's levels, emerging into Seattle's evening streets. The drive home blurred together. Paige operated on autopilot, following familiar highways south the city lights, giving way to suburban sprawl, giving way to the stretch of forest between Seattle and Portland. Her phone buzzed repeatedly. Probably Lennox checking in, wanting to know how the reunion went. Paige ignored it. She'd call her friend tomorrow when she could speak without crying. By the time she reached the city limits, it was past midnight. Portland's streets were quieter than usual, the weekend crowd having moved on to after parties and late-night diners. Paige parked in her apartment building's lot, gathering the purse and shoes she'd kicked off somewhere around Olympia. The elevator to her floor felt like the last stretch of a marathon she hadn't trained for. Her apartment welcomed her with familiar darkness. Paige didn't bother turning on lights. She dropped her purse, stepped out of the green dress that hadn't made any difference, and crawled into bed, still wearing her makeup. Tomorrow she'd deal with the mess. Tomorrow, she'd answer Lennox's increasingly concerned text messages. Tomorrow, she'd figure out how to move forward with her life, knowing that Isaiah Crawford had found happiness without her. Tonight, she just needed to survive the pain. Paige pulled the covers over her head, curling into a tight ball, and let herself cry again. Quieter this time, exhausted tears that leaked from closed eyes. She'd been too late. That childhood promise, that teenage love, it didn't matter anymore. Isaiah had moved on, found someone new, someone who presumably hadn't broken his heart and chosen racism over love. Sleep came eventually fitful and full of dreams that felt more like memories. She was 7, sitting alone at a park, when a boy approached with a basketball and a smile. She was 12, eating chocolate chip cookies in a treehouse, making promises that felt more binding than any adult vow. She was 17, sitting in Isaiah's car after a movie, his hand warm in hers as they talked about college and the future and all the ways they'd make it work. She was 18, standing in her parents' dining room, hearing the ultimatum that would define the next decade of her life. She watched herself choose wrong, watched the devastation bloom across Isaiah's face when she told him it was over. She watched herself become someone she'd eventually hate, someone who valued comfort over courage, approval over authenticity, safety over the kind of love people spent their whole lives searching for. When Paige woke Sunday morning, her pillowcase was damp and mascara had stained the fabric black. Sunlight filtered through her bedroom curtains, cheerful and ignorant of her misery. Her phone showed 12 missed calls from Lennox and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. "Call me when you get this. Paige, you're freaking me out. If I don't hear from you in the next hour, I'm calling the police." She typed out a quick response. "I'm alive. Just need some space. I'll call you later." Lennox's reply came within seconds. "Girl, what happened?" Paige stared at her phone, trying to compress 10 years of regret and one devastating reunion into a text message. She gave up. "Isaiah has a girlfriend. That's what happened." The 3 dots indicating Lennox was typing appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. "Finally, I'm coming over. You don't have to." "Too late. Already in my car." Paige dragged herself out of bed, catching sight of her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight, her eyes puffy and red, her skin blotchy, yesterday's makeup creating dark smudges that could have passed for bruises. She washed her face, pulled her hair into a messy bun, and changed into sweatpants and an old t-shirt from a 5K she'd never actually run. Lennox arrived with coffee and pastries from the bougie bakery that charged $13 for a croissant. She took one look at Paige and pulled her into a tight hug that lasted a full minute. "Okay," Lennox guided Paige to the couch, pressing a latte into her hands. "Tell me everything." So Paige did. She started with the reunion invitation, her weeks of indecision, the drive to Seattle. She described seeing Isaiah across the ballroom, how time had changed him and somehow made him more himself. She recounted their conversation in painful detail, every word etched into her memory with acid-sharp clarity. And then she got to Simone, beautiful and confident, and completely unaware that she delivered the killing blow to Paige's decade-old hope. Lennox listened without interrupting her expression, shifting from sympathy to concern to righteous anger on Paige's behalf. When Paige finally finished, her coffee had gone cold, and the croissants sat untouched on the coffee table. "Okay," Lennox took a deep breath. "First of all, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you're hurting, and I'm sorry that 10 years of hope ended that way." But Paige, here it comes, Paige thought. The tough love speech she'd known was inevitable. "But Paige, what did you expect?" Lennox's tone was gentle but firm. "It's been 10 years. You broke his heart. You chose your racist parents over him. Why would he wait for someone who hurt him like that? Because we promised each other when we were kids." Paige heard how pathetic it sounded even as she said it. "We promised we'd get married someday. I thought I thought maybe that promise still meant something." Lennox reached over, squeezing Paige's hand. "Paige, you were 12 years old. Kids make promises all the time. Doesn't mean they're binding." But it felt binding. The tears threatened again, but Paige blinked them back. "It felt real, Lennox. I've never loved anyone the way I loved Isaiah, and I threw it away because I was scared of my parents' disapproval." "So what are you going to do now?" The question hung in the air. Paige had been avoiding it all night, but there was no escaping it now. What was she going to do, pine for another decade over a man who'd moved on, continue measuring every relationship against an idealized memory of first love, spend the rest of her life regretting a choice she'd made at 18. Nothing. The word felt heavy final. He's moved on. He's happy. I need to accept that and move on too. Lennox didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. They spent the rest of the day on Paige's couch watching mindless television and eating pastries that tasted like cardboard. Lennox stayed until evening, leaving only after extracting a promise that Paige would call if she needed anything. After her friend left, Paige sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, phone in hand. She opened Instagram for the first time in months, typing Isaiah's name into the search bar with trembling fingers. His profile was still private, but his profile picture was new. It showed him smiling, genuinely happy, wearing a suit that suggested professional success. Simone wasn't in the photo, but her presence was implied in the confidence of his expression. Paige closed the app, hating herself for looking, hating herself more for caring. She needed to move on. She needed to accept that the childhood promise they'd made had been just that. A child's understanding of forever dissolving under the weight of real-world complications in the passage of time. But moving on proved impossible. Over the next 3 days, Paige found herself ambushed by memories at the worst possible times. She'd be at work counseling a foster family about placement options, and suddenly she'd remember being 15, studying for finals at Isaiah's house. His mother, Yolanda, had made them snacks, pretending not to notice when they held hands under the dining room table. She'd be at the grocery store reaching for cereal and remember Isaiah's strong opinions about breakfast foods. He'd insisted that breakfast was the most important meal and therefore deserved the best options, which in his teenage opinion meant anything with chocolate and marshmallows. They'd had ridiculous arguments about nutrition, both of them knowing it was really just an excuse to spend time together. The memories came in waves, each one sharper than the last. Paige remembered their first kiss behind the bleachers after a football game junior year. She'd been nervous, her hands shaking, but Isaiah had been patient and gentle, and everything she'd needed. She remembered driving lessons in his beat-up Toyota Isaiah in the passenger seat, trying not to panic as she practiced parallel parking. She remembered late-night phone calls that stretched until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, building a connection that had felt unbreakable, until it broke. The memory she tried hardest to avoid always surfaced anyway, relentless in its clarity. She was 18 again, sitting in Isaiah's car outside her house. It was 2 days after her parents had delivered their ultimatum, 2 days of agonizing over what to do. She'd barely slept, her stomach in knots, her mind circling endlessly through options that all felt wrong. Isaiah had picked her up for their usual Friday night date. They'd planned to see a movie, grab dinner, spend time together away from the pressures of impending college and uncertain futures. Instead, Paige had asked him to park at the end of her street, away from her house where her parents might see. "Something's wrong," Isaiah's voice had been cautious, reading her expression. "Paige, what is it?" She tried to be strong, to deliver the blow quickly and cleanly. "We need to talk. My parents, they know about us. They saw us together and they're not okay with it." "Okay." Isaiah's hand had found hers, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "So we'll figure it out. We knew this might happen eventually. It's not ideal, but we'll deal with it together." No, the word had come out sharper than Paige intended. "Isaiah, they gave me an ultimatum. It's you or them. If I keep seeing you, they're cutting me off completely. No college fund, no car, no place in the family. They're serious." Isaiah had gone still, his hand freezing on hers. "So we'll get scholarships. Work part-time. Paige, we've talked about this. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but I can't." The words had felt like swallowing glass. "Isaiah, I can't do it. I can't give up everything for what?" His voice had been quiet, dangerous. "For us, for me." Paige had made the mistake of being honest. "For someone my family will never accept. For a relationship that people will always judge. Isaiah, I'm 18. I'm not ready to give up my entire future for a black guy your parents don't approve of." "Say it, Paige. That's what this is really about." The accusation had hung between them, true and terrible. Paige had tried to deny it, to dress it up in practical concerns and rational thinking. But Isaiah had seen through it all. "I love you." His voice had cracked on the words. "I've loved you since we were 7 years old. And I thought you loved me too. Thought that promise we made mattered to you." I do love you. Paige had been crying, then tears streaming down her face. But Isaiah, love isn't enough. We're being realistic. We're too young for this to work against so much opposition. So you're choosing them, choosing their racism, their prejudice, their narrow-minded view of who you should love. You're letting them win. I'm choosing my future. The words had come out defensive, angry. I'm choosing not to destroy my life over a high school relationship that probably wouldn't have lasted anyway. She'd regretted the words the moment they left her mouth, but it was too late. The damage was done. Isaiah had stared at her like she was a stranger, like the girl he'd loved had been replaced by someone he didn't recognize. Get out of my car. Isaiah, get out of my car, Paige. I can't look at you right now. Paige had climbed out, legs shaking, heart breaking with every step toward her house. She turned back once, hoping Isaiah would change his mind, would fight harder, would tell her they'd figure it out. But he was already driving away, taillights disappearing around the corner, taking 10 years of history and a childhood promise with him. That had been the last time they'd spoken. Until 3 nights ago at a reunion where Paige had learned that Isaiah had indeed moved on, found someone new, and apparently wasn't interested in revisiting old promises with the girl who'd broken his heart. By Wednesday, Lennox staged what she called an intervention. She showed up at Paige's apartment with wine and ice cream, finding Paige exactly where she'd been for the past 3 days. On the couch, wearing the same sweatpants, scrolling through old photos on her phone. Okay, that's it. Lennox confiscated both the phone and the pint of Ben& Jerry's. You've been moping since the reunion. This stops now, I'm not moping. Paige reached for her phone, but Lennox held it out of reach. I'm processing. You're wallowing. There's a difference. And while I understand you're hurt, Paige, you can't spend the rest of your life mourning a relationship that ended 10 years ago. Why not? It seemed like a reasonable plan to Paige. Other people spent their lives regretting major mistakes. Why should she be different? Because you're better than this. Lennox sat down, her expression softening. Look, I get it. First love, childhood, promise is the one that got away. It's powerful stuff. But sweetheart, you have to move forward. Isaiah has. Maybe it's time you did too. The words stung because they were true. Isaiah had clearly moved forward. He had a girlfriend, a successful career, a life that didn't revolve around decade-old heartbreak. Only Paige was stuck, trapped in a loop of regret and what-ifs. I don't know how. The admission felt like defeat. Lennox, I've tried, I've dated, I've gone to therapy, I've built a career I'm proud of, but nothing works. Every man I meet, I compare him to Isaiah, and no one measures up. Maybe because you're not comparing them to real Isaiah. Lennox leaned forward, her voice gentle. You're comparing them to the idealized memory of Isaiah, the boy you loved at 17. But that person doesn't exist anymore. People change, Paige. Isaiah has changed. You've changed. The relationship you're mourning, it might not have even worked out if you'd stayed together. But we'll never know, will we? Because I was too scared to try, Lennox sighed, pulling Paige into another hug. No, you won't know, and you have to make peace with that. You made a choice at 18 that you regret. Welcome to adulthood, where we all make terrible decisions and spend years dealing with the consequences. Despite everything, Paige laughed. It came out wet and raspy, but it was laugh. Leave it to Lennox to deliver hard truths wrapped in dark humor. They spent the evening talking through Paige's options. She could stay in Portland, focus on her career, maybe give online dating another shot. She could try therapy again with a new counselor. She could consider moving to a different city, starting fresh somewhere without memories of Isaiah or her parents or the choices she'd made. What Paige couldn't do was spend the rest of her life stuck in the past, mourning a promise made in a treehouse by two 12-year-olds who hadn't understood that love, however real, wasn't always enough to overcome circumstance and fear. But as Lennox left that night extracting another promise that Paige would actually leave her apartment tomorrow, Paige couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted at that reunion. Seeing Isaiah again, talking to him, being reminded of everything they'd been to each other, it had cracked something open in her chest that 10 years of avoidance had kept safely sealed. She'd told him she still loved him. She'd asked if the childhood promise still mattered, if there was any chance they could try again. And before Simone had appeared, Isaiah's face had shown something Paige couldn't quite read. Not immediate rejection, something more complicated. It didn't matter, she told herself. He had a girlfriend. He'd moved on. Whatever that complicated expression had meant, it clearly hadn't meant yes. Paige forced herself to get ready for bed to actually wash her face and change into clean pajamas. Tomorrow she'd go to work, counsel families in crisis, pretend she had her own life together while helping others navigate theirs. She'd move forward because that's what adults did. They made mistakes, they dealt with consequences, and they found ways to keep living, even when part of them wanted to stay frozen in the moment before everything fell apart. But tonight, alone in her apartment, with the ghost of a childhood promise haunting her thoughts, Paige let herself grieve one final time for the future she'd given up. For the girl who'd been too scared to fight for love. For the boy who'd loved her anyway until she'd proved herself unworthy of that love. For the promise that, despite everything, still felt more real than any vow she'd ever made as an adult. Isaiah Crawford sat across from Simone Banks in the restaurant they'd chosen for their first date 8 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. Full circle, except this time they were ending what they'd started, and both of them knew it. Simone set down her wine glass, her expression calm in that way people get when they have already processed the inevitable. You've been different since the reunion. Distracted. Somewhere else, even when you're sitting right here. I know. Isaiah owed her honesty at minimum. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry for feeling something. Simone's smile was sweet but genuine. Be sorry if you lie about it. So I'm asking directly, are you still in love with her? With Paige, the question deserved truth. Isaiah thought about lying about trying to salvage something he'd known for months wasn't quite right. But Simone deserved better than his half-hearted commitment to a relationship that had always felt like it was missing something essential. I don't know if I'm still in love with her. His voice was quiet but steady. But seeing her again talking to her, it brought back everything I'd convinced myself I was over. And that's not fair to you, Simone nodded slowly. Processing. You know what, I'm actually relieved. Isaiah looked up sharply. Relieved I've always felt like I was competing with a ghost. Simone reached across the table, her hand covering his. Some memory you couldn't let go of, some standard I couldn't meet no matter what I did. Now I understand why. You never got closure. You never dealt with what happened between you and Paige. You just buried it and tried to move on. The accuracy of the observation hit hard. Isaiah had done exactly that. Buried the hurt from his breakup with Paige, thrown himself into college. And the Marines in his career dated women who were perfectly fine but never quite right. He told himself he was over it, but seeing Paige at the reunion had exposed that lie. You deserve someone who's all in. Simone squeezed his hand. Someone who doesn't have unfinished business with their first love. And Isaiah, you deserve to figure out if that childhood promise still means something, or if you can finally let it go. Either way, you need closure. They finished dinner with the strange peace that comes when both people recognize an ending is actually a beginning. Simone talked about a job opportunity in Atlanta. She'd been considering something she'd put on hold because of their relationship. Isaiah listened, offering support, feeling the weight of obligation lifting from his shoulders, even as guilt tried to fill the space. At her apartment door, Simone hugged him tight. I hope you find what you're looking for. Whether that's Paige or just peace with the past, I hope you find it. Thank you. For everything. For being honest when I wasn't being honest with myself. After Simone closed her door, Isaiah sat in his car for long minutes processing. He just ended an 8-month relationship because of a 10-minute conversation with a woman who had broken his heart a decade ago. The logical part of his brain insisted this was insane. But the rest of him, the part that had been holding back with every woman he'd dated since Paige, felt lighter than it had in years. He drove to his parents' house without consciously deciding to. The familiar route through Seattle's neighborhoods calmed something in him, muscle memory, guiding him to the place that had always meant safety. Lawrence and Yolanda Crawford's house looked exactly the same as it had throughout his childhood. Well-maintained, welcoming, the front porch light always on. His father answered the door, surprise morphing into concern. Isaiah, everything okay? Is it ever too late for your mom's pot roast? Lawrence smiled, stepping aside. She made extra. Come on in. The kitchen smelled like home, roasted vegetables and herbs, and the particular comfort that came from a mother who expressed love through food. Yolanda emerged from the living room, her face lighting up before concern took over. My baby, you look troubled. Sit, I'll fix you a plate. Over pot roast that tasted exactly like every childhood Sunday dinner, Isaiah explained. The reunion seeing Paige again breaking up with Simone. His parents listened without judgment, exchanging those long married looks that communicated entire conversations silently. So Paige Dawson is back in your life. Lawrence set down his fork, his principal voice emerging, calm, analytical, designed to help students think through problems. How do you feel about that? Confused, angry. Isaiah pushed food around his plate. I thought I was over her, spent 10 years convincing myself I'd moved on. Then she's standing there asking if our childhood promise still matters, and suddenly I'm 17 again, wondering why I wasn't enough for her to fight for. You were enough. Yolanda's voice was fierce in the way only mothers could be. Don't you dare think otherwise. That girl made a choice based on fear, not your worth. She said she's regretted it every day since. Isaiah looked up at his mother. Said she cut off her father 3 years ago over his racism, that she spent the past decade wishing she'd been brave enough to choose differently. People grow up. Lawrence's tone was thoughtful. 18-year-olds make decisions with 18-year-old wisdom. The question is whether 28-year-old Paige is the same person who broke your heart. How do I know that's the problem? We talked for maybe 20 minutes before Simone showed up. That's not enough time to figure out if someone's changed fundamentally or if they're just saying what they think I want to hear. Then find out. Yolanda reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Baby, you've carried this hurt for 10 years. Either you find out if there's something worth salvaging or you get real closure and move on. But you can't keep living in this limbo where you're half invested in relationships because you're still wondering about the girl from the treehouse. Isaiah thought about the treehouse still standing in his parents' backyard. He'd maintained it over the years, some part of him unable to dismantle the place where he and Paige had made their most earnest promises. 12-year-old him had been so certain about the future, so confident that love conquered everything. Reality had taught him otherwise, but the memory of that certainty still held power. What if she hurts me again? The question came out quieter than intended vulnerability. He usually kept locking down. What if I open up and she decides it's too hard, too complicated, too much opposition, then you'll hurt? Lawrence's honesty was gentle but unflinching. And you'll heal like you did before. But Isaiah, you're already hurting. You've been hurting for 10 years just in a way you've gotten used to. Maybe it's time to find out if there's something on the other side of that hurt. Isaiah stayed until late, talking through his confusion and fear with the two people who'd always given him space to figure things out on his own timeline. When he finally left the treehouse, stood silhouetted against the night sky, a monument to promises and the complicated work of keeping them. He texted Paige before he could overthink it. Can we talk coffee sometime this week? Her response came within 2 minutes. Yes, anytime. Just name the place. They met at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill neutral territory where neither of them had history. Isaiah arrived early, ordering his usual black coffee and claiming a corner table where they could have privacy. His leg bounced with nervous energy, years of practiced composure deserting him. Paige walked in exactly on time, and Isaiah's breath caught. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She looked younger somehow, less polished than at the reunion, more like the girl he'd known. Her eyes found his immediately, and the anxiety in her expression mirrored his own. She ordered something complicated with extra foam and joined him at the table, clutching her cup like a lifeline. Thanks for meeting me, Isaiah kept his voice neutral. I wasn't sure, after the reunion, after meeting Simone, I thought you'd never want to see me again. Simone and I broke up. The words came out blunt, unvarnished. Turns out, you can't build a relationship when you're still hung up on someone else. Paige's expression cycled through surprise, hope, and something that looked like guilt. I'm sorry, that must be hard. It was honest. Isaiah wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, grounding himself. She deserves someone who could give her everything, and I couldn't. Because you're right, I've been measuring everyone against what we had, and no one's measured up. The admission hung between them, naked and raw. Paige's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. Isaiah, I need to say something before we go any further. Her voice shook slightly. What I did to you, choosing my parents over us, it was the worst decision of my life. I've spent 10 years regretting it, 10 years trying to build a life that felt meaningful without you in it. And I failed. Every relationship, every man who asked me out, none of them were you. I've been stuck at 18 making the same cowardice disguised as practicality. I need to hear you say it. Isaiah leaned forward. Not the apology, not the regret. I need to understand why. Really why. Because my brain knows you were 18 and scared, but my heart still feels like I wasn't worth fighting for. Paige's composure cracked, tears spilling over. You were worth everything. You were always worth everything. Isaiah, I let my parents convince me that love wasn't enough, that social approval and financial security mattered more than being with the person who made me happy. I let their racism poison my thinking, make me believe that our relationship was the problem instead of their prejudice. And when you drove away that night, I knew immediately that I'd made a mistake. But I was too proud and too scared to fix it. Why now? Why tell me this after 10 years? Why show up at the reunion asking if our childhood promise still matters? Because I'm not 18 anymore. Paige's voice steadied, finding strength under the vulnerability. I've spent 3 years estranged from my father because he tried to control my life again. I work every day with kids who've been failed by adults who were supposed to protect them. And it's taught me that safety isn't the same as love. I'm not scared of my parents anymore, Isaiah. I'm only scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what if. What if I'd been brave enough at 18? What if that treehouse promise still means something? What if you'd be willing to try again? Isaiah stared at her, every defense mechanism screaming at him to walk away to protect himself from potential heartbreak. But sitting across from Paige, seeing the grown woman she'd become instead of the terrified 18-year-old who'd broken his heart, something shifted. I want to try again. The words felt monumental, inevitable. But Paige, I need to know you're different. That you won't run the first time things get hard or people disapprove. Because interracial relationships still face prejudice. It's better than it was, but it's still there. Can you handle that now? The stares, the comments, the family members who will have opinions. Yes, Paige didn't hesitate. I've already lost my family over this, over choosing to live by my own values instead of their racist rules. I can handle strangers' opinions, Isaiah. What I can't handle is losing you again. Her conviction rang true in ways it hadn't 10 years ago. Isaiah saw the difference in her posture, her eye contact, the way she held herself accountable instead of making excuses. This wasn't the girl who'd prioritized her parents' approval. This was a woman who'd learned hard lessons and come out stronger. Okay, Isaiah nodded slowly. We start over. Take it slow. Date like normal people, figure out if we still fit after all these years. But Paige, if we do this, you can't let fear win. Not your parents' fears, not society's prejudices, not even your own doubts. We face it together or we don't do this at all. Together, Paige reached across the table, her hand hovering near his. I promise. And Isaiah, that childhood promise, the one we made in your treehouse. I meant it then and I mean it now. I want to marry you someday. Not tomorrow, but someday. If you'll have me. Isaiah took her hand, the contact electric after years of absence. We're taking this slow. But yeah, I still want that treehouse promise too. Their first official date happened 3 days later. Isaiah picked a Thai restaurant he'd discovered during his years in Seattle. Nothing fancy but authentic, the kind of place that valued flavor over atmosphere. They sat across from each other in a booth worn smooth by thousands of previous meals, and Isaiah felt the strangest mix of familiar and foreign. Tell me about your life. Paige leaned forward, genuinely curious. What happened after high school? Where did you go? University of Washington. Computer science. Isaiah watched her reactions as he talked, cataloging the ways she'd changed and stayed the same. My dad wanted me to go into education like him, but I'd always loved programming. After graduation, I enlisted in the Marines for 2 years. You were in the military. Paige's surprise was evident. I didn't know that. There's a lot we don't know about each other anymore. Isaiah kept his tone light. That's what this is. Relearning who we've become. They talked through dinner, swapping 10 years of condensed biography. Isaiah's brief engagement to a woman named Keisha that ended when she took a job overseas. Paige's series of relationships that never progressed past a few months because none of them felt right. They discussed careers and friends and the ways they'd both tried to fill the space left by their breakup. After dinner, they walked along the waterfront Seattle skyline, reflecting off Elliott Bay. The evening was cool, but not cold, tourists and locals mixing in the easy way of summer evenings in the city. You're more confident now, Paige observed as they walked. In high school, you were always a bit shy, especially around authority figures. Now you've grown into yourself. The Marines will do that. Isaiah smiled at memories both difficult and formative. Forces you to figure out who you are, what you're capable of. It changed me in ways I needed. I like who you've become. Paige's voice was soft. You're still the kind, thoughtful Isaiah I fell in love with. But now there's this strength underneath this certainty about your own worth. I had to learn it. After you broke up with me, Isaiah decided honesty served them better than politeness. I spent a long time thinking I wasn't good enough, that maybe your parents were right that I couldn't offer you the life you deserved. The Marines taught me that was bullshit. I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. You were always good enough. Paige stopped walking, turning to face him fully. More than good enough. I was just too stupid and scared to see it. Isaiah pulled her close, and when they kissed, it felt like coming home and discovering a new country simultaneously. Familiar but changed, the same connection they had had as teenagers, now deepened by time and loss and hard-won growth. Over the next 2 months, they fell into a pattern. Dinners twice a week, weekend hikes in the Cascades, late-night phone calls that stretched past midnight. Isaiah introduced Paige to his childhood friends Malik and Trevor, who'd known about their history, and approached her with cautious welcome. Paige introduced Isaiah to Lennox, who grilled him thoroughly before giving her grudging approval. But not everyone was supportive. Paige's mother called on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight with forced politeness. Your aunt mentioned seeing you at a restaurant downtown. With Isaiah Crawford, Paige's stomach tightened, old patterns of fear trying to reassert themselves. She pushed them down. Mom, please tell me you're not back with that boy. Candace's tone sharpened the facade of civility cracking. Paige, after everything, after what it did to this family last time, his name is Isaiah, and yes, we're dating again. Paige kept her voice level, refusing to be drawn into old arguments. Mom, I'm 28 years old. You don't get a vote in my relationships anymore. You know how your father feels. This will destroy what little relationship you have left with him. Dad's a racist, and you enable him. I don't care about maintaining a relationship built on me denying who I love. Isaiah is a good man, better than most, and I'm not giving him up again to please people who value skin color over character. You're making a mistake. People will talk. Your father's business associates are social circle. This will reflect on all of us. Let them talk. Paige felt a strength she hadn't possessed at 18, hard-won through years of regret. I'm done living my life according to other people's prejudices. If Dad can't accept that, that's his problem, not mine. Candace hung up without another word. Paige stared at her phone, hands shaking with adrenaline and anger, and something that felt like liberation. She'd chosen Isaiah this time. She'd chosen love over approval, authenticity over comfort. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. Isaiah faced his own opposition 3 weeks into their renewed relationship. His company held a dinner for potential investors, and Isaiah brought Paige as his date. She wore a navy dress that was professional but elegant, and Isaiah felt proud introducing her to colleagues who'd only heard vague references to his personal life. The evening went smoothly until Garrett Morrison, one of the primary investors, had too much wine and lost whatever filter usually governed his words. Crawford, you always did have good taste in women. Garrett's smile was oily and appropriate. Though I'm surprised, usually your people stick to your own kind, if you know what I mean. The table went silent. Paige felt Isaiah tense beside her, his jaw tightening. Before he could respond, she jumped in, her voice deadly calm. Your people, I'd like you to clarify what exactly you mean by that, Mr. Morrison. Garrett backpedaled immediately, his face reddening. Oh, just making conversation. No offense intended, but offense was given. Paige leaned forward slightly, her social work training in de-escalation and confrontation deployed with surgical precision, because it sounded very much like you were making assumptions based on Isaiah's race. And I'd hate to think that a respected investor in this company harbors racist attitudes toward one of the lead developers who's been instrumental in your returns. The rebuke was polite but unmistakable. Garrett sputtered something about misunderstanding and excused himself quickly. After he left, Dante Rodriguez, Isaiah's boss, raised his glass in a subtle salute. Thank you for that. We've needed someone to call him out directly. Well done. Later that night in Isaiah's car, Paige replayed the conversation. Is that what you face, those kinds of comments regularly? Often enough, Isaiah pulled out of the parking garage, his expression weary. Microaggressions, assumptions, people who think they're complimenting me by acting surprised I'm articulate. The racism isn't always as obvious as your parents were, but it's there. How do you stand it? You learn to pick your battles. Decide what's worth confronting and what you let go for your own sanity. But Paige, that's what I need to know you understand. This won't go away. People will always have opinions about us being together. Can you really handle that for the long term? Yes, Paige's voice was certain. I won't sit silently while people disrespect you. Not anymore. I'm done being complicit in racism, even passive racism. 3 months into their reconciliation, Isaiah took Paige home for Sunday dinner. She was terrified in ways the investor dinner hadn't touched. These were the people who'd watched her break Isaiah's heart, who'd seen him struggle through the aftermath. They had every right to hate her. Yolanda Crawford opened the door and Paige saw the assessment in her eyes, the careful evaluation of whether this white girl would hurt her son again. But Yolanda's smile was warm if guarded. Paige, welcome. Come in. The house smelled like roasted chicken and familiar comfort. Isaiah's younger sister, Keisha, was there with her husband, Jamal, and their toddler daughter. Keisha's greeting was notably cooler than her mother's. So you're the famous Paige. Keisha's tone was neutral, carefully so. Isaiah talked about you for years after you broke up. Years. The indictment was clear. Paige met Keisha's eyes, refusing to look away. I know, and I'm sorrier than I can express. I was 18 and scared, and I made a choice that hurt Isaiah and hurt me too. I can't change the past, but I'm trying to do better now. Over dinner, Paige slowly navigated the complex dynamics of winning over people who had every reason to distrust her. She talked about her work with foster families, shared stories about the kids she advocated for, answered questions about her estrangement from her own father. She was honest about her mistakes, vulnerable about her regrets, but steady in her commitment to Isaiah. On the porch after dinner, Lawrence joined her while Isaiah helped his mother with dishes. The twilight settled soft around them, crickets beginning their evening song. I loved your son when I was 7 years old. Paige broke the silence, needing to say it. And I love him now. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm grateful for one. I promise I won't waste it. Lawrence was quiet for a long moment. We don't blame you for your parents' prejudices. But Paige, we need to know you're strong enough now to face opposition. Because it will come. From strangers, maybe from friends, possibly even from our community. Not everyone believes interracial relationships are appropriate even among Black families. Are you prepared for that? The question was fair and necessary. Paige nodded. I've already lost my father over refusing to live by his racist standards. I work every day with families dealing with prejudice and discrimination. I understand what we're facing, and I choose this anyway. I choose Isaiah. Whatever comes, we face it together. Something in Lawrence's expression softened. Good. Because my son deserves someone who will fight for him the way he'd fight for them. Don't make him question his worth again. After Paige left, Keisha cornered Isaiah in the kitchen. She's different, stronger than she was. Isaiah dried the dish his mother handed him. I know. Do you trust her? Really trust that she won't run when things get hard? I'm learning to. Isaiah met his sister's eyes. She's proved herself so far, standing up to her parents, being open about our relationship, facing difficult questions. I think she means it this time. Good. Keisha's expression was fierce. Because if she breaks your heart again, I'm going to have words with her. Strong words. Isaiah laughed, grateful for family that protected him, even when it meant being suspicious of second chances. I can handle this, Keisha. I know you can. But you shouldn't have to. Not again. The opposition came in waves after that, testing their commitment in ways both expected and surprising. At an upscale restaurant 2 weeks later, an older white couple at the next table made loud comments about mixed couples and how it was unnatural, wrong, against God's design. Paige stood up before Isaiah could stop her. Excuse me, she approached their table, her voice carrying. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. That man you're talking about, he's my boyfriend, and he's a better person than either of you will ever be. I'd appreciate it if you'd keep your bigotry to yourselves. The couple sputtered indignantly. The restaurant manager rushed over. Isaiah pulled Paige away before the situation escalated further, but once they were outside, he couldn't stop smiling. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Paige was still shaking with adrenaline. I won't let anyone disrespect you. Not anymore. I won't be complicit in racism even by staying silent. Isaiah pulled her close, kissing her fiercely. You've changed so much. The girl who chose her parents' approval wouldn't have said anything to that couple. That girl doesn't exist anymore. Paige's voice was fierce. I killed her the day I realized letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life. 6 months after their coffee shop conversation, Isaiah took Paige back to their childhood neighborhood. They drove past her old house, now occupied by a different family with different dreams. Past his old house where his parents still lived, and maintained the treehouse where everything had started. Finally to the park where they'd first met at 7 years old. Remember this place, Isaiah asked, though he knew she did. Of course. Paige smiled through sudden tears. This is where it all started. You pushed me on the swings and promised not to let me fall. I meant that then. Isaiah turned to face her fully, and I mean it now. Paige, I will never let you fall. Not if I can help it. They stood in the gathering dusk, the park empty around them, and Paige felt the weight of their shared history settle like a blessing instead of a curse. They'd lost 10 years, made mistakes that scarred them both, but they'd found their way back. The childhood promise made in innocence had survived everything. Fear, distance, heartbreak, time itself. Isaiah pulled her toward the old swings, and they sat side by side like they had 21 years ago. The chains creaked with familiar protest, the worn seats holding them securely. What happens now? Paige asked quietly. Now we keep going. Isaiah's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing naturally. We keep dating, keep facing opposition, keep proving to ourselves and everyone else that what we have is worth fighting for. And someday, when we're both ready, we make good on that treehouse promise. Paige turned to look at him. The man who'd been her first friend, her first love, her greatest regret, and now her second chance. The setting sun painted everything gold, and in that light, she could see both the boy he'd been and the man he'd become. I'm ready now. Her voice was steady, certain. Isaiah, I've been ready for 10 years. I just wasn't brave enough to admit it. Well, Isaiah squeezed her hand. Lucky for both of us, I'm a patient man. We've got time, Paige. All the time we need to do this right. They swung gently, feet dragging in the dirt, and Paige felt something she hadn't felt in a decade. Peace with her choices, confidence in her future, certainty that this time she wouldn't let fear win. 8 months after their reconciliation, Isaiah told Paige to keep Saturday evening free. Nothing elaborate, he promised, just something he wanted to share with her. She pressed for details, but he remained maddeningly vague, that secretive smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Saturday arrived with Seattle's rare perfect weather. Clear skies, warm sun, the kind of day that made residents forget the 9 months of gray they endured for these brief moments of glory. Isaiah picked Paige up at noon, deflecting her questions about their destination with practiced ease. We're going to my parents' house. Paige recognized the route as they drove through familiar neighborhoods. Just trust me. The Crawford house looked peaceful in the afternoon light, but Isaiah's parents' cars were conspicuously absent. Isaiah parked in the driveway, coming around to open Paige's door with exaggerated formality that made her laugh. What are you up to? You'll see. He led her through the side gate into the backyard. The tree house stood exactly as Paige remembered, it weathered but sturdy, testament to Lawrence Crawford's construction skills and Isaiah's maintenance over the years. But something was different. Fairy lights had been strung along the railings, not lit in the daylight, but promising magic after sunset. The latter had been reinforced, new boards replacing old ones. Isaiah. Paige turned to him, her heart starting to race with understanding. Come on, he gestured toward the ladder. After you. Paige climbed carefully, her hands remembering the feel of rungs she'd scaled countless times as a child and teenager. The treehouse interior had been transformed. More fairy lights draped across the ceiling and walls. Photos covered every surface. Pictures of them as children gap-toothed and innocent. Teenage photos from school dances and casual hangouts. Even recent photos from the past 8 months documenting their second chance. In the center sat a small table with 2 plates of chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven. Your mom's recipe. Paige's voice came out thick with emotion. Made them myself this morning. Isaiah moved to stand beside her, wanted everything to be right. He took her hand, and Paige felt the significance of the moment settle over them like a physical weight. This was it. This was the conversation that would define the rest of their lives. Paige, when we were 12 years old, we sat in this exact spot and made promises we didn't fully understand. Isaiah's voice was steady, despite the emotion Paige could see in his eyes. You said you'd marry me even if the whole world said we shouldn't. I said I'd make you happy forever. We spent 10 years apart, 10 years trying to move on, trying to convince ourselves those childhood promises didn't matter. But they did matter. They always mattered. Because, Paige, you're the only woman I've ever wanted to marry. The only future I've ever been able to imagine clearly. Isaiah got down on one knee, pulling a ring box from his pocket. The fairy lights suddenly blazed to life, controlled by some timer he'd set, and the treehouse transformed into something magical. Paige's breath caught tears already streaming down her face. We've made mistakes and learned from them. We've faced opposition and come through stronger. We've proved that what we have is worth fighting for. So I'm asking now, as adults who've earned this moment, Paige Dawson, will you marry me? Will you be Paige Crawford, like we promised all those years ago? Yes. The word came out choked with emotion. God, yes, Isaiah. I've wanted this since I was 12 years old. Yes, the ring was perfect. A vintage setting with a center diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like stars. Isaiah slipped it onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, and then they were kissing, tasting salt from mingled tears, laughing and crying simultaneously. They ate cookies and planned futures in the treehouse where everything had started. A small wedding, they decided. Close friends and family only. A house with a big yard for the 3 dogs they'd get eventually. Children someday, when they were ready. Everything they dreamed about as kids now achievable because they'd both grown into people capable of keeping promises. Do you think 12-year-old us would be happy? Paige asked, her head resting on Isaiah's shoulder. If they could see us now, I think 12-year-old me would be thrilled that he actually got to marry Paige Dawson. Isaiah kissed the top of her head, and I think 12-year-old Paige would be proud of the strong woman she grew into. Even though that growth took a decade and a lot of mistakes, especially because of that. We're not the same people who broke up at 18. We're better, stronger, more sure of ourselves and what matters. This version of us is ready for marriage in ways 18-year-old us never was. They stayed in the treehouse until sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. When they finally climbed down, Yolanda and Lawrence were waiting on the back porch, champagne and knowing smiles ready. She said, yes, I take it. Yolanda pulled Paige into a tight hug. How could I say no? Paige showed off the ring, still surreal on her finger. He proposed in our treehouse, with cookies and fairy lights and every perfect detail. My son's always been a romantic. Lawrence shook Isaiah's hand, then pulled him into a hug. Proud of you, son. They celebrated with champagne and impromptu dinner, Lawrence grilling steaks while Yolanda produced sides she'd somehow had ready, despite claiming no knowledge of Isaiah's plans. Kesha showed up an hour later, summoned by some family text chain, ready to interrogate Paige about wedding plans that didn't exist yet. Small ceremony. Paige repeated the only decision they had made. Close friends and family. Probably this summer, if we can plan it that fast. My church would be perfect. Yolanda's eyes lit with the particular joy of mothers watching their children marry. And I know a caterer who owes me favors. The planning consumed the next 3 months with surprising intensity. Paige had never been one of those girls who fantasized about wedding details, but finding herself engaged to the man she'd loved since childhood made every decision feel weighted with significance. They chose the community center in their old neighborhood, the space large enough for the 100 guests their small wedding had somehow accumulated. Isaiah's sister insisted on being maid of honor. Her earlier skepticism transformed into fierce protectiveness. You break his heart again, and I don't care that you're the bride. Keisha's threat was delivered with a smile, but Paige heard the sincerity underneath. I won't, I promise. Good, because he deserves this happiness. You both do, actually. Just took you long enough to figure it out. Paige's relationship with her own mother remained complicated. Candace had reached out after hearing about the engagement through some social network that connected Seattle's upper-middle-class white families. The conversation had been stilted, painful, but Candace had asked if she could come to the wedding. Dad won't come. Candace's voice had been small over the phone. You know he won't. But Paige, I'd like to be there, if you'll have me. The request opened old wounds Paige thought had scarred over. She'd discussed it at length with Isaiah, with Lennox, with her therapist. She'd started seeing again to process the complicated emotions of reconciliation. You don't owe her anything. Isaiah had been clear about that. If having her there will hurt more than help, then don't invite her. This is our day, but she's still my mom. Paige had stared at the wedding invitation addressed, but not yet mailed to Candace Dawson. And she's trying even if it's late and imperfect. Maybe that's worth something. So Candace received an invitation, and Paige tried not to obsess over whether her mother would actually attend. 2 weeks before the wedding, Paige sat in her apartment, surrounded by seating charts and vendor confirmations when her phone rang. Unknown number, Seattle area code. She almost didn't answer. Hello, Paige. It's your father. Robert Dawson's voice triggered every childhood anxiety Paige thought she'd outgrown. Her hand tightened around the phone, breath catching in her throat. Dad, your mother tells me you're getting married. To that Crawford boy. The words were laden with judgment, 3 decades of ingrained prejudice distilled into one disapproving sentence. Paige felt old patterns trying to reassert themselves. The urge to justify, to explain, to somehow earn approval she'd never received. She pushed the patterns down, finding her voice. His name is Isaiah. And yes, we're getting married. I'm calling to tell you this is your last chance. Robert's tone was hard and flexible. Call off this wedding, end this relationship, and you can come home. We'll forget this whole period of rebellion. You can meet someone appropriate, build the life you were meant to have. The offer was absurd, offensive, and somehow exactly what Paige had expected. Robert Dawson hadn't changed. He never would. The only difference was that Paige had changed enough to recognize that his approval wasn't worth sacrificing her happiness. No, the word came out clear, certain. Dad, I'm not calling off my wedding. I'm marrying Isaiah because I love him, because he's the best man I've ever known, and because I'm done letting your racism control my life. If you can't accept that, then we have nothing more to discuss. Then you're no longer my daughter. The disownment should have hurt more than it did. Paige had already lost her father 3 years ago when she'd first stood up to him. This was just making official what had been true for a while. I'm sorry you feel that way, Paige kept her voice steady. But Dad, I'm not sorry I'm marrying Isaiah. I'm only sorry it took me 10 years to be brave enough to choose love over fear. Goodbye. She hung up before he could respond, before the lifetime of conditioning could make her second-guess herself. Her hands shook, adrenaline flooding her system, but underneath the anxiety was something that felt like freedom. Isaiah arrived 30 minutes later, summoned by her panicked text. He found her curled on the couch, not crying but stunned, processing the finality of burning a bridge she'd been standing on for 28 years. He called. Paige looked up at Isaiah. My father told me I had one last chance to call off the wedding and come home. When I said no, he disowned me officially. Isaiah sat beside her, pulling her close. I'm sorry. Even when someone's terrible, losing them still hurts. The thing is, it doesn't hurt as much as I expected. Paige leaned into his warmth. I already knew who he was. This just confirms it. And Isaiah, I'm choosing you. I'll always choose you, whatever that costs. They sat together in the gathering darkness, Paige processing loss while simultaneously feeling the rightness of her choice. Robert Dawson's approval had been a chain she'd worn for too long. Cutting it felt like learning to fly. The wedding day arrived with typical Seattle uncertainty. Clouds threatening rain, but holding off sun breaking through periodically as if undecided about its commitment. The community center had been transformed by Yolanda and a battalion of church ladies who'd adopted the wedding as their personal mission. White and gold decorations draped every surface. Photos of Paige and Isaiah as children lined the entrance, a visual journey from 7-year-old park companions to the adults about to marry. The centerpieces featured small replicas of their treehouse, Keisha's idea, simultaneously whimsical and deeply meaningful. Paige stood in the bridal suite, Lennox fussing with her dress, while Keisha handled makeup with professional precision. The dress was simple but elegant, ivory lace with a sweetheart neckline flowing without being overwhelming. Paige had tried on 40 dresses before finding this one, knowing immediately it was right by how she'd felt wearing it. You're shaking. Lennox smoothed imaginary wrinkles from the dress. Nervous or excited? Both. Paige laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. I'm about to marry Isaiah Crawford, the boy from the treehouse, How is this real? It's real because you both fought for it. Keisha stepped back, surveying her work. Because you learned from your mistakes and chose differently. Now stop trembling before you mess up my makeup application. A knock interrupted them. Yolanda entered her own dress, a deep burgundy that complemented her complexion beautifully. Behind her, hesitant and uncertain, stood Candace Dawson. Paige's mother looked older than she had 3 years ago, where an uncertainty aging her in ways money and skincare couldn't prevent. She wore a tasteful navy dress, her expression carefully controlled. Paige. Candace's voice was soft. You look beautiful. Mom. Paige felt tears threaten and blinked them back furiously. You came. Of course I came. Candace stepped further into the room, her eyes sweeping over her daughter. I know I haven't been the mother you deserved. I enabled your father, stayed silent when I should have spoken up. Let fear control too many decisions. But Paige, I'm here now, if you'll let me be. The moment hung delicate between them, years of hurt and disappointment balanced against the tentative offer of reconciliation. Paige thought about her father's call, his ultimatum, his inability to grow or change. Then she looked at her mother, who was at least trying, however imperfectly. I'm glad you're here. Paige crossed the room, accepting her mother's careful hug. It means something that you came. They didn't have time for deeper conversation. The ceremony was starting in 10 minutes. Yolanda ushered Candace to her seat while Lennox performed final adjustments and Keisha reapplied lipstick one last time. Ready, Lennox held out the bouquet, white roses and gold accents matching the overall theme. I've been ready for 16 years. Paige took the flowers, their weight grounding her. Let's do this. Lawrence Crawford waited at the end of the aisle, offering to walk Paige down since her own father had made his choice clear. The gesture meant everything. Acceptance, forgiveness, the blending of families that should have happened a decade ago. Thank you. Paige took his offered arm. For everything, for raising Isaiah right, for giving me another chance for this. You're family now. Lawrence's smile was warm. Have been since you and Isaiah were 7, really. We're just making it official. The music shifted, signaling the start of the processional. Paige took a deep breath, and then she was walking down the aisle toward her future. Isaiah stood at the altar in a charcoal suit that fit perfectly, his expression cycling rapidly through awe and love and barely contained emotion. His best man, Malik, stood beside him, holding the rings and grinning broadly. The assembled guests rose as Paige passed. Isaiah's extended family, their mutual friends, the people who'd supported them through reunion and reconciliation. Paige's eyes locked on Isaiah's and everything else faded to background noise. This was it. The moment they'd promised each other in a treehouse at 12. The future they'd almost thrown away at 18. The love they'd fought to reclaim at 28. Lawrence placed Paige's hand in Isaiah's at the altar, then stepped back to join Yolanda in the front row. The officiant, a pastor from the Crawford family church, smiled at them both. Before we begin the ceremony, Isaiah and Paige have asked that someone special share a reading. Isaiah's nephew, Marcus, Keisha's oldest at 12 years old, stepped forward with a folded paper. He'd been nervous about this responsibility all week, but now his voice rang clear and steady. When Paige Dawson and Isaiah Crawford were 12 years old, they sat in a treehouse and made promises to each other. Marcus read from the paper the words Paige and Isaiah had written down years ago, preserved by some miracle of sentimentality. Paige said, I promise I'll marry you, Isaiah Crawford, even if the whole world says we shouldn't. Even if everyone tries to stop us, I'll choose you. And Isaiah said, I promise to marry you, Paige Dawson. We'll have a house with a big yard and 3 dogs, and we'll be happy forever. The reading hit exactly as intended. Several guests sniffled audibly, Yolanda dabbing her eyes with tissues. Lennox was openly crying. Even Candace looked moved, though, whether by the words or by recognition of her own failures, Paige couldn't tell. Today, Marcus continued, they're keeping those promises. Not as kids who didn't understand what forever meant, but as adults who've learned that love is worth fighting for. He returned to his seat, and the ceremony proceeded with traditional vows. But when it came time for personal additions, both Paige and Isaiah had prepared something specific. Isaiah went first, his voice steady despite the emotion Paige could see in his eyes. Paige, I've loved you since I was 7 years old. I loved you when we made promises in a treehouse. I loved you when you broke my heart. I've loved you through 10 years apart and 8 months of learning each other again. You're my first love, my always love, my only love. I choose you today, tomorrow, and for all our forevers. Paige barely managed to get through her own vows without dissolving completely. Isaiah, when we were kids, you promised not to let me fall. You've kept that promise in more ways than I can count. You've been patient when I didn't deserve patience, forgiving when I didn't deserve forgiveness, loving when I made it so hard to love me. I choose you now as I should have chosen you 10 years ago. I choose love over fear, courage over comfort, and you over everyone who said we shouldn't be together. Forever, Isaiah. That's my promise. The rings were exchanged, simple gold bands inscribed with coordinates, the exact location of their treehouse. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and when Isaiah kissed Paige, sealing promises both old and new, the assembled guests erupted in applause and cheers. Mr. and Mrs. Isaiah Crawford. The officiant's announcement made it real, official, binding in all the ways that mattered. They processed back down the aisle hand in hand, Paige Crawford for the first time, grinning like fools and not caring who saw. The reception was immediate. The community center transformed from ceremony space to celebration with practiced efficiency. Dinner was traditional soul food, Yolanda's influence clear in every dish. Speeches were delivered, Malik telling embarrassing college stories, Keisha warning Paige with humor that barely masked real protectiveness, Lennox recounting their friendship and Paige's years of regret. Even Candace stood, her voice shaking but determined. I haven't been the mother my daughter deserved, but watching her marry Isaiah today reminds me that it's never too late to choose love over fear. Paige, Isaiah, I'm proud of you both. May you be braver than I was. The first dance was to Nina Simone, the song Isaiah had put on mixtapes for Paige when they were teenagers. They swayed together and Paige felt the weight of the ring on her finger, solid proof that childhood promises could survive everything if the people making them were willing to fight. You're stuck with me now, Isaiah murmured against her hair. No take-backs. Wouldn't dream of it. Paige pulled back enough to see his face. Isaiah Crawford, you're the best decision I ever made, even if it took me 10 years to make it. They danced through the evening, cutting cake and tossing the bouquet, and enduring good-natured teasing from friends and family. When they finally left sparklers lighting their path to Isaiah's car, Paige felt like she was stepping into the life they dreamed about in that treehouse. The life they'd almost lost. The life they'd reclaimed through courage and second chances and the stubborn refusal to let fear win. 2 years later, Paige Crawford stood in the backyard of their new house, watching her husband play with their daughter. The yard was huge, exactly as they'd specified when house hunting. 3 rescued dogs, a lab mix of corgi, and something that might have been part shepherd, wrestled nearby, their barking joyful and chaotic. Amara Crawford had just turned 2, her curly blonde hair catching sunlight as Isaiah lifted her high, making her shriek with laughter. She had Paige's eyes and Isaiah's smile, beautiful in that way mixed children often were, transcending the narrow categories that had tried to keep her parents apart. Mama come play. Amara's vocabulary was expanding, daily new words emerging with toddler pronunciation. Coming baby. Paige set down the paperwork from her recent promotion. Department head now, more money and responsibility, but worth it for work that mattered. Isaiah caught her around the waist as she approached, pulling her into the kind of kiss that would have scandalized their daughter if she understood what she was seeing. The 3 dogs immediately converged, demanding attention and treats. This is it, isn't it? Paige looked around their yard, their house, their life. Everything we promised in that treehouse. Everything and more. Isaiah's free hand rested on her stomach where a second Crawford was just beginning to make his presence known, too early to tell anyone but too real to ignore. They'd faced challenges. Candace was a regular presence in their lives, now tentative, but trying, while Robert Dawson remained absent by his own choice. They still encountered racism, store clerks who followed them suspiciously, strangers who made comments about their daughter, family members on both sides, who needed time to adjust. But they faced it together, united in ways their younger selves couldn't have imagined. What do you think she'll promise when she's 12? Paige watched Amara chase the corgi around the yard. What kind of future will she dream about? Whatever it is, we'll support her. Isaiah's voice was certain, and we'll make sure she's brave enough to keep her promises even when it's hard. Inside the house, framed on the mantel, sat the photo from their wedding day beside another photo. 2 12-year-olds in a treehouse holding hands and grinning at a camera, believing absolutely in the promises they were making. Some promises transcended time and circumstance and fear. Some promises were made with such innocent certainty that they echoed through decades, waiting for the people who made them to grow into versions of themselves capable of keeping them. And sometimes, against all odds, childhood sweethearts found their way back to each other. Not as the same people who made those promises, but as better versions, stronger and wiser and willing to fight for love that was worth everything. Paige Crawford watched her husband lift their daughter onto his shoulders, the three dogs circling them like satellites, and felt peace settle deep in her bones. They'd kept their promise. Through hurt and distance and growth and reconciliation, they'd kept their promise. And that she thought was worth every tear, every year, apart every obstacle they'd overcome to get here.